Presenting today,
I'm not going to sit
Linda
there.
Wall, president of the Hanson Public Library Foundation, the sponsor of today's author talk featuring Barbara Shapiro, author of The Art Forger. I would request at this time, if you have any electronic devices, that you turn them off or silence them if they are on. A couple brief foundation announcements. Our next event is the annual open house on Saturday, November 15th. We'll be having live music, light refreshments, a clown, a magician, Curious George. So I encourage you to look for further information in the local media and our library. Our annual membership drive is just beginning for the foundation. I encourage you to consider renewing your membership or becoming a new member. There are some forms out on the table and they'll be available in the upcoming couple months or month. Contributions are tax deductible to the full extent of the law. We're a nonprofit, and any contribution you make will help us continue our mission of enhancing library services. Right now, I'd like to introduce Helen Levesque, our foundation treasurer, another trustee of the library, and she's going to introduce our author for today. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out today. As Liz said, I'm Helen Levesque. I am a director of the foundation and a trustee on the board of trustees for the public library. We're honored to have Barbara Shapiro today. She's the author of The Art Forger. Is there anyone not familiar with the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum or the heist of 1990? Excellent. I did place some handouts. I see most of them are gone, of the original heist and an update that the FBI has made as of May of this year, or March of this year, I believe, just for informational purposes. The Art Forger is a literary thriller that uses both the Gardner Museum and the heist as pivotal elements in the story of Claire Roth, who is a pariah of the art world, and the story explores the darker side of human nature. All of the characters in the novel have a price, a line they're willing to cross in order to further their ambitions. The Art Forger is the winner of 8 awards, one of which was Boston Globe's Top Mysteries of 2012. You may not know that Ms. Shapiro is the author of 5 suspense novels in addition to The Art Forger: The Safe Room, Blind Spot, See No Evil, Blameless, and Shattered Echoes, as well as a nonfiction book, The Big Squeeze. So you'll need to check those out as well. We are going to have a book signing after the talk today. If you could form a line going this way around the room, we have books for sale. Down back, they're paperback, they're $15 each. And then if you make your way up here, Barbara would be happy to sign them for you. So let's give a warm welcome to Ms. Barbara Shapiro.
Thanks. Let's see. I'm going to grab water before I start. Yep, empty bottle. Full bottle. Well, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it, especially when I saw there's this huge campaign forum going on today. So thank you very much. But you should also vote. It's really great to see all of you here. As you just heard, I have written, not going to work. I have written 5 novels before The Art Forger. And they came out and they died. And so what I used to do, the books would come out and I'd say to my friends, okay, you go to the Cambridge bookstore when I'm there, you go to the Brookline one, you go to the one there. And because nobody except my friends ever came to my book signings. And so here I am, and I don't know any of you. So it's just great. It's really pretty fabulous. So these 5 books that came out and died and went immediately out of print. See, this is how long ago it was. It was before ebooks. So when a book went out of print, it was gone. It was out of print. So this is what happened to the first 5 books. So they were all considered psychological suspense. So I thought, all right, well, maybe I should change genres and write something different. So I thought, what should I write? So I like reading contemporary women's fiction, for lack of a better genre. So I thought, okay, I'll write a book that's contemporary women's fiction, and maybe that will sell better. So I wrote a book that was contemporary women's fiction, and I thought it was a pretty good book. Well, that was pretty good. Gave it to my agent, who didn't think it was all that good at all. So I got another agent. And this agent took it out to all of the major publishers in New York. And unfortunately, every single one of them agreed with my first agent. So now I had 5 novels that went nowhere and 1 that didn't even get a chance to go anywhere, sitting in my drawer. So I thought, okay, what else can I try here? So I thought, well, what if I combine psychological suspense with the genre of contemporary women's fiction and write a book that's both of them? Maybe that'll work. So I did, and I wrote a book that I thought was a pretty good example of this combination of genres. And so I finished it. Each of these books took about 2.5 years to write, and I brought it to my agent. He didn't like it. So I got another agent. And this agent took it to all of the big publishers in New York, and they all agreed with the original agent. And now I had 2 books in the drawer. So writing is actually my 5th or 6th career, depending on how you want to count them. And any normal person would say, okay, it's on to career 7 or 8. But oh no, I thought, I'm going to give it another try. So what is it that people like to read? Well, people love to read thrillers, right? So why don't I write a thriller? The problem was I had no idea how to write a thriller, but that didn't stop me. So I went to the library and I found a book. And this is a real book. You too, if you decide you want to write a thriller, can find this book. And it's called How to Write the Blockbuster Novel. Real book. It may even be in the library. And in this book, he says there are 6 things that you need to write the blockbuster novel. One of them is that the characters need to be bigger than life. Another one is that it has to be on an international palette. The characters have to be going from one place to another place to another place. And the stakes have to be huge. You know, it just can't be romance or a little mystery. It's got to be world peace and devastation and things like that. So I took notes and I followed his directions, and I wrote what I know is a really, really good thriller. Yeah, you see it coming, don't you? New agent, didn't like it. Got another agent. She took it to New York. Nobody wanted to publish my really good thriller. So now I'm thinking it might be time for career 6 or 7. So I came up with an idea of what I wanted to do, and I was discussing it with my husband one night. And he looks at me and he says, you don't want to do that. He says, you know you want to write another book. And I said, but I can't. And he said, well, why don't you just write a book that isn't in a genre? Just write a book of your heart. And I'm like, oh, well, there's an idea. And I teach writing. And I always tell my students that, you know, they say that you need a room of your own, and having a room of your own to be a writer is great. And I have a room of my own, and I love the room of my own. But what a writer really needs is a working spouse with benefits. It's true, yes, it's true. And so here, my working spouse with benefits is saying, just forget about the job, just go write another book. So obviously I said, okay, that's what I'll do. So then the problem was I didn't know what was the book of my heart. What's the book of my heart? Well, fortunately, and I think almost every novelist, I understand that you have quite a few coming to speak here. We all have a file, and mine is very cleverly named Novel Ideas. And in this cleverly named file, I have photographs, and I have newspaper clippings and magazine articles, and little scribbles on napkins. And so I opened it up. And one of the first things that I saw was an article on Isabella Stewart Gardner. Now, I have been interested in her for years. I see that most of you know who she is, but for those of you who don't know that many details, she lived at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. And she was a feminist before the word even existed. It's interesting, in those days, she was very, very wealthy. She married one of the wealthiest men in Boston. And in those days, women who were very wealthy they were more confined. They had less freedom than middle class and working class women. And so she moves up here with her very rich husband from New York, and she looks around and she's like, I don't want to live like this. So she decided she wasn't going to. And she did indeed, she was very eccentric, very smart. And she did indeed walk 2 lion cubs down Boylston Street. She went to the Symphony, the most staid of all Boston institutions, with a headband on that said, OU Red Sox. Can you imagine doing this? She wore dresses that were really low cut, like to here, which horrified all of the women of the time. The men liked it a little bit. But the most amazing thing that she did is she became the first great American collector, man or woman. And she and her husband traveled around the world, and they collected things, and not just paintings and sculptures and furniture and rugs and tapestries and all kinds of things. And they lived in one of those really big houses on Beacon Street, and within a few years she had filled it up. And there are pictures of it, and you can barely walk, between all the stuff. Now we might call her a hoarder, but she's a collector, and even today there's a very fine line. So she filled up the house, and you couldn't move. So what they did is they bought the house next door and broke through the wall, and within another few years she filled all of that up. So that was when she decided that she would build herself a palace, and it would house her art collection, and she would live in it, and when she died, she would give it to the city of Boston. So when she built it, it was called Fenway Court, and she lived there, and when she died, she left it to the city, and now it is the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. If there is anybody here who hasn't gone to the museum, you really have to go, because it is the most unique art museum you're ever going to go to, for good and ill. She's got amazing masterpieces there, but they're very eccentrically shown. So there can be a gallery with a wall like this, and there'll be 40 pieces of art on it. Just kind of no apparent curatorial thought about it. No little cards telling you what you're looking at. You might find a Michelangelo over a door. You might find a Rembrandt hidden by a piece of furniture. The lighting is terrible, but the building is magnificent. The art is magnificent, and it is Belle. Her friends called her Belle, and I've been hanging out with her for so long, I call her Belle. And this is the way she wanted it, and this was it. And in her will, she stipulated that nothing could be changed. Nothing could be added, nothing could be subtracted. The lighting couldn't even be upgraded. So she's a little bit of a control freak. And it stayed that way for 100 years. And so I'm thinking, I could write about Belle. This will be really cool. But I couldn't figure out a way into the story. So I flipped open my file again, and I saw a couple of articles on the heist that happened at her museum in 1990. The thing about the heist, aside from the fact that it is the largest art heist ever in all of history, is that it was very poorly executed. They did some really smart things, and they did other very dumb things. So, for example, the heist takes place early in the morning of the day following St. Patrick's Day. So that's actually a pretty smart thing to do, because a lot of people in Boston are otherwise occupied at 1 o'clock in the morning. That was smart. The museum itself had a very poor security system, and they had two guards that were on every night. But the guards weren't really guards; they were more night watchmen. They had no training; they didn't know what they were doing. And one of them admitted later to the fact that he was always stoned every night that he was at work. The museum also had no insurance. So these two guys dressed up like Boston cops, but they're not like dressed up like real cops. They're in uniforms that look like something you would buy from CVS on Halloween afternoon because you just got invited to a party. So they're really poor uniforms, but they get into the museum and they're very easily able to overcome these two guards and tie them up in the basement. You know, one's stoned and the other was pretty old, and it really didn't take all that much. And apparently they had them in the basement, and one of the thieves said, "If you don't say anything, we won't hurt you." And one of the guards said, "They don't pay me enough to say anything." So I figured that was the stone guy. And then the thieves take 81 minutes and they go around the museum, which is 4 stories with circular galleries, and they rip these masterpieces out of their frames. They found wood and glass on the floor, so they think they broke them over their knees. They took Rembrandt's Only Seascape. They took Vermeer's The Concert, which is one of my all-time favorite paintings. I used to go to the museum just to visit it. I love that painting so much. They took Degas, they took a Manet, but they left some of the most valuable artwork where it was. They left Michelangelo's, they left Rembrandt's. Europa is just hanging on the wall. They just left that there. And they took some things that weren't worth anything at all. They took the finial off the top of a Napoleonic flag, and they took a glass beaker. And then, so for those of you, the museum is in the city, and it's right in the middle of the city. And they parked their car right next to the museum, and they went in and out a couple of times, bringing the artwork to their car, so they throw it into their rusted out old Datsun hatchback and drive away with over $500 million worth of artwork, not a single piece of which has been seen since. The FBI, Interpol, the Boston Police, the Gardner Museum, all kinds of private detectives have been on the case. It's going on 25 years. Nothing, absolutely nothing. So now I'm thinking, okay, I got the heist and I got Belle, so maybe I can make these two things work for my story. If you've listened to a lot of novelists, I'm sure you've heard them talk about how they're writing and then a character comes alive and takes over the story and just runs away with it. Well, I wait. I sit there and I wait. And nobody ever comes and runs away with the story. It just doesn't work for me. So I had to come up with a different way of going about this. I actually have a math background. I have a PhD in sociology because all writers, novelists need a PhD in sociology. It's the usual prereq. I had a strong statistical background. So I use math techniques to write a novel. Because you may not be aware that you can make, or this is what I do, all the storylines follow a normal curve, because a story can be broken up into 5 separate segments, which then can be broken up into 10, into 20, so you get all of your plot points to work. So all of my plots follow a normal curve. I keep track of what's going on in the book using multiple spreadsheets. I have all kinds of different charts, and then I have my very low-tech multicolored file cards. So I have Belle's story, and I figure it out on my normal curve, and I get my major plot points, and then I figure out the heist story, and that's got the normal curve and the major plot points. Then I transfer Belle's story to red file cards, all of the major plot points. I do the same for the heist story on green file cards. Then I start flipping them around, trying to figure out how I can make the stories work together. So I have this out on my dining room table, which is a really good place because when I'm working out a novel, they have to stay there for what can be months before I figure it out. And I'm not a particularly good cook, and this way I don't have to have any dinner parties while I'm working this out. So I got my green cards and my red cards, and I'm looking at them, and it's just not coming together. It's not coming together right. So I'm a little depressed, and I'm upstairs fooling around on my computer. And you know how when you just start screwing around on the internet, sometimes you end up at places that you really don't want to be? You know, it's like pornography, and you're like, get me out of here, get me out of here. Well, fortunately for me, I stumbled onto a website about art forgery, and I was just blown away. I knew nothing about art forgery, and I was just fascinated by it. Like, who are these people who forge art, and why do they do it, and how do they do it? And what happens when they get caught? Or more interesting, what happens when they don't get caught? And so I'm spiraling down until I come to a quote by a man who had been the director at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And he said, I know that 40% of the paintings in my collection are forgeries. I just don't know which ones they are. So now I'm like, whoa, this is really cool. And I get out my yellow file cards, and I come up with my normal curve for the forgery piece. And I got that out on the table, and I'm mixing them around. And it's like almost there. It's almost there, but I need something else. So about that time, while I was right before I started working on the book, we had moved, we raised our kids in Lexington, and then we moved into Boston, into the city, in the South End where the book is set. And I'm not an artist. People always ask me, which I take as a high compliment, but I've always loved art. My stick figures don't even look like stick figures, so as I am an art appreciator. And so there we were in the middle of Boston, and I could walk to all of these fabulous museums and galleries. The South End is known for its artist community and studios, and so I started taking advantage of it. And it occurred to me one day as I was going through a gallery that I could add a story of a contemporary artist in Boston to the mix. So I get out my orange file cards, and I come up with the story, and I move them all around, and it's like, voila, I've got my story. I can see it. And the story is, for those of you who haven't read the book, it's the story of a young struggling artist in Boston whose name is Claire Roth, but she's struggling more than most. See, I learned this from the How to Write the Blockbuster novel thing. So she's struggling more than most because she's a pariah in the art world because of a scandal that happened previously. And so nobody is interested in buying her work. No galleries will show her. No museums are interested. She can't even get into local contests. So she's forced to work for a company called Reproductions.com. And Reproductions.com hires her to copy masterpieces, which are then sold online as copies. This is a completely legitimate business, it's fine, and she's particularly good at copying Degas, and this is how she makes her living, doing this during the day, which of course she hates, and at night she goes home and works on her own art that nobody is interested in looking at. So when the book opens, this is Claire's state, and she is approached by the largest gallery owner in Boston, and he says to her, if you will forge a painting for me, I will give you your own one-woman show at my gallery, and this will catapult her out of pariahhood, and everything will be great. So she did this for a very, very short time, and she says, okay, I'll do it. But as you know, when you start messing around with the devil, you're gonna get some trouble. So the first trouble that happens to Claire is that when the painting is delivered to her studio, it turns out to be a Degas stolen during the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist. And as she starts to delve into it and starts to forge the painting, she starts to think that the painting itself, the one that's hung in the museum for 100 years, is also a forgery. And then as she tries to follow the path of understanding what happened to the painting, it turns out that the answer lies in Isabella Stewart Gardner's relationship with Edgar Degas. So see, I got the 4 different things and it got them all going and it's all working and I'm excited. Except then I realized I don't know anything about any of these topics. I really, I definitely don't know anything about forgery. Well, fortunately, I was trained as an academic, and so I know how to do research, which I had a lot of. They say that you're supposed to write what you know. Well, The Art Forger was my 10th novel, and I ran out of things that I know about 9 ago. So research was going to be it, and this was going to be a research book. And so I'm sure there are a few academics here today, and you know that when you do academic research, you have to go to every last person who has even breathed on your subject. And they have to be cited, and then they're in the bibliography and everything. You've got to go down to every last detail, which is one of the reasons why I got out of academia. But when you write a novel, you just do as much research as you're interested in, and then you make the rest of it up. So it was great. It was great. The only problem is that you do all of this research, and a novel, to me, the most important thing is the story, the journey of the character through the story. And you can't, and I love novels where you learn things, but you kind of learn them underneath. You get to the end and you go, oh, wow, I didn't know that's what it was like in World War II. Oh, I didn't know that it was like to live in Africa. But it's got to be kind of hidden in there. So we have a saying, I work with the writers group, and we have a saying, and it's called, your research is showing. So every time I would bring in my chapters, they would tell me to cut, cut, cut. And so, like, for example, the Isabella Stewart Gardner story is told through letters, fictional letters that Belle writes to her fictional niece. And I think there are 6 in the book, 5 or 6. And I have about 12 of them. So if any of you want to see any more of these, just talk to me afterwards. So anyway, after the process of writing and rewriting and doing all of this stuff, this took me over 3 years, about 3.5 years to get to this point. And my writers group really thinks it's good. I give it to my mother, and she thinks it's great. So I know I'm on my way, right? Gave it to my agent. It wasn't that she didn't like it. She said she did like it, but she said it didn't fit into a genre. And if it didn't fit into a genre, then she didn't know how to sell it to publishers. Got another agent. This agent recognized it didn't fit into a genre, but that, she thought she could sell it. So she takes it out to all of the big publishers in New York, And they all said they liked it, but it didn't fit into a genre. And if it didn't fit into a genre, how do they sell it to booksellers? So now I'm really depressed. I'm contemplating divorce. You know, it's like, what kind of stupid idea was that? Write a book with no genre? Where did you come up with that? And I said to my agent, I said, look, just take it out to every single publisher that you think might even possibly be interested. I don't care how big, how small, just because I've got some career decisions to make, like that idea of the next career shift. And so she did. And it ended up on the desk of an editor at Algonquin Books. Algonquin Books has a very different policy than most large publishers. The very large publishers publish between 300 and 500 books a month, every month. The vast majority of their marketing budget goes to Stephen King and J.K. Rowling and people like that. The next level of their marketing budget goes to other people whose names you know, and then the other 467 books on their list get very, very little marketing support. And in this day and age, that's what you need. There's so many books out there. How do you know a book to read? And this is the fate of my first 5 books. And the fate of almost all books that are published because of the way the numbers work. Algonquin, on the other hand, publishes 12 new titles a year. And so they're very picky about what they do. I mean, this was one of the publishers I wouldn't have even thought that would ever be interested in my book. And they get behind all of their books. And so the editor loved it. And she didn't care that it didn't fit into a genre. And so they want to publish it. And you can just imagine after all of this how thrilled I am and how fabulous this is. And now I don't have to divorce my husband and my children will be happy and everything. And best of all, I get to write another book. It means I can keep writing. So she invites me down for lunch to New York. So I go to New York and I'm like a kid, you know. I'm 60 years old, you know, and I'm like a kid here. And it's, you know, I'm going to New York to meet with my editor. I'm going to the publishing house. I have a publishing house, you know. This is like, and it was this gorgeous spring day and I couldn't have written the scene better myself. And, you know, all of the bushes are blooming and everybody's walking in the streets. And even in New York, they're smiling because it's spring. And I'm in the yellow cab and I'm going down to meet my editor, you know. It's like so cool. And I meet her and she's lovely and we go out to lunch. And we have a lovely discussion. And she says to me, you know, we don't publish that many books, but we have a lot of books that end up on the New York Times bestseller list. And I'm like, oh, this is so great. I have a publisher. They get on the New York Times bestseller list. And then she says, and we're going to do everything we can to get your book on the New York Times list. And so now I start crying. And she's like looking at me like, oh boy, what did I do now? And I wasn't crying because I thought that they ever would do it. I was crying because an editor would actually even say this to a writer. I mean, it was just so amazing to me. And then they go out and they actually do it. It was like, it's like beyond belief given my story. And then, as if that weren't good enough, the first 5 books that were all out of print, now because of the success of their youngest sibling, are now all available as ebooks or print on demand. And I got a contract to write 2 more novels so that I could, you know, keep going and I don't have to do that other job. And so the bottom line of this story is that after 25 years in the trenches, I am an overnight success. Thank you. Thank you. So I understand that there are always lots of questions from the audience. So I'd be very happy to answer any questions, and I will warn you that I am a teacher, And that if you don't raise your hands, I will call on you. So, yes,
Not
ma'am.
a question, a comment. You mentioned you didn't know why forgers do what they do, artists. They make a lot of money doing it. Right after I read your book last year for our book club, there was a story on 60 Minutes on someone, and I do believe he only spent a year, 2 years in jail after making millions and millions of dollars, and then when he came out, he started painting under his own name.
This is the issue is the forgers and why they do what they do, and you're absolutely right, they make money. But it has become extremely lucrative. But the reason that most of them did it initially is that they were frustrated artists who couldn't get recognized. So they decide, okay, I'm going to forge a painting, and then once they believe it's a Rembrandt, then they'll realize what a great artist I am. These guys aren't the smartest, It's like if nobody knows, if they accept it, they don't know that they did it. But still, I mean, an incredible number of them. But yes, if you get caught as a forger, it's not you go to jail for a year or two. It's not that long. And as the 60-minute, I mean, not that you really want to be in jail, but considering the millions and millions of dollars that you can make. And then a number of these forgers, once they got out of jail, John Myatt was one, I can't remember who the 60 Minutes show is about, but they then set up, like John Myatt had a show in London called Genuine Fakes. And he had people lined up for blocks. And now they're selling their own paintings. So there's so much interesting stuff. Or this guy Landis, it's another forger who they can't prosecute him. What he did is he copied paintings and then he gave them away to museums. So he was just this eccentric old guy. He even pretended to be a priest sometimes, and he gave all of these things away. So they weren't really vetted all that carefully. And they discovered later that that they weren't the real paintings. But the definition legally of forgery is that you copy a painting by a well-established artist and sell it as the work of that artist, which he didn't do. So he's off scot-free. But of course, he didn't make any money either. So he has other issues. Yes, sir.
What's your theory about where the stolen artwork is? You must have been asked this question 1,000 times.
Yeah, and I really don't have a good answer. Yeah, there have been so many different theories about what might have happened, from Whitey Bulger, which now they're pretty sure isn't, to every small con person and and petty thief in the area. At one point, one of the suspects was the Catholic Church. Now, wouldn't you think the Catholic Church had enough paintings? Why would they want to do this? And they have been actively on this case for 25 years and absolutely nothing. So my speculation is just as good as anybody else's. I have two theories, the good theory and the bad theory. So the good theory is one of the things that happens with these paintings after they're stolen is that they're used as collateral on the black market for guns and terrorism and for drugs. And what they do is they use them to borrow money and they go around. And so one of the other suspects was the Irish Republican Army, who actually was well known for kidnapping paintings and then ransoming them off for their colleagues in jail. So my theory is that it was the Irish Republican Army, and they sent people over, and they got the paintings. They also had some inside knowledge, so they knew that no one was going to go to the museum until 8 o'clock the next morning. So they got them out of there. They drove directly to the dock, and they put them on a ship and shipped them off to Ireland, and they've been using them underground all of these years. The reason this is the good theory is because that way there's the possibility of getting them back. And if they're being used as collateral, they would take care of them because otherwise they're not worth anything. So that's my good theory. My bad theory is that, you know, that stone guard I was telling you about? He was a musician and was at Berkeley, I think. And he was rather loose-lipped. And he would talk all the time about how easy it was to break into the museum and how, you know, really would be a lark. And so my fear is that a couple of people took him up on this, with or without his help, and did it as a lark, which would explain the randomness of what they did. And that then they got into that car and drove away and looked in the back seat and said, oh shit, now what do we do? And they did something bad to the paintings. So those are my two working theories. Obviously, the first one is the preferable one, but nobody knows. Nobody knows. I mean, it's, you know, it's a great story for a novel. Yes?
How do you feel about your youngest book making it into a movie?
The youngest book being made into a movie. It's, we've gotten lots of nibbles, but, you know, nothing yet.
Oh, really? I thought they were filming.
No, I wish they were. I wish they were. They were filming a movie called The Forger, which at the MFA, which is, but you're not the first person to think think that was it. I only wish that were the case. I only wish. Yes, ma'am.
I want you to help me understand. You took your book and an editor took over. And then it goes up for auction. I don't understand, if you already have a publisher and an editor, what is the auction part of it? And also, how much work does an editor put into a book? Does it remain the book that you wrote? Or is it mostly what the editor told you you should have written?
Okay, so this is a multi-part question.
Yes, because I want to get it in there
Okay.
before somebody else.
So the multi-part question. So the question is, how does it work? Basically, how do you get the book sold and what the responsibilities are? And then how much does an editor change the book from what you give them until the final? So the way it works is you have an agent. And your agent, see, it used to be that you could send a manuscript directly to a publisher. And they had people working there who would read it as a slush pile. But those people are long, long gone. So they don't have anybody to read the slush pile. So the agents have become the slush pile control people. So your agent likes the book. They're going to take it out. They get 15% of every cent that you make on that book, you know, including the movie rights and the foreign rights and everything else. They make nothing if they don't sell it. So it's kind of like a real estate agent. So the agent takes it around to all of the different publishers because the agents know editors in particular houses that might be interested in the book. So then somebody wants it. If many people want it at the same time, then it goes for auction. That didn't happen with this book.
What do you mean it goes for auction?
Goes for auction means so that the agent brings the book to 6 different publishers, and 3 of them want it. So they start bidding wars over how much of an advance they're going to give you on the book. Because what you do is you get an advance against royalties. So they'll give you anything from $1 to $10 million if you're J.K. Rowling for them to buy the book. And then that money, then as the book royalties come in, you don't start making money until you've worked off your advance. And that's the way that works. Then you have an editor who buys your book. The editor wants it. She pitches it in-house to everybody there. And then they decide, yes, they want to buy it for this much money. You sign the contract, you're all set. Then the editor takes the book and edits it. And I am very fortunate that I have a really good, respectful, and smart and wonderful editor who I respect. And we work together. Our aim is the same thing. It's to get the best book it can be. So like with The Art Forger, I think we went through 2 pretty major rewrites. And she doesn't tell me I have to do anything. She says this is what she thinks, and a third of the time, she's absolutely right. Why didn't I think of that? Another third of the time, it's like, okay, let's work it out. Maybe this could work. And another third of the time, I'm not changing that. But now with my new book, so my next book is called The Muralist, and it's coming out next fall. It's also about art, but it's about an artist working for the WPA right before World War II in New York, and she's hanging out with Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner and Mark Rothko and Willem de Kooning and all of these people. And she goes missing at the beginning of the story. And because she's been trying to get her Jewish family out of France before the war, and she's gotten involved in politics. She's befriended by Eleanor Roosevelt, and she's made enemies of Charles Lindbergh and Joe Kennedy and Breckinridge Long and all of these people, so she disappears. And this, but, yeah, Algonquin. Yes, it is Algonquin. Yeah. The catalog, they're fabulous. But anyway, I worked on this book, which they already knew, they had bought it on a summary. So this is an Algonquin book. And I gave it to my editor after about, maybe it was like 2.5 years of working on it, and she didn't really like it at all. And she suggested like major revisions. Like the book was originally a total historical, and she wanted a contemporary character in there, not just, a frame, but a contemporary character that was going in and out of the book. So I decided to try it, and I spent about 9 months doing that, and I gave it to her, and she liked it better, but she still didn't like it. And we went back and forth again, and I took it back for another 6 months, rewrote it, gave it back to her. She still had reservations. I worked on it for another 6 months, and finally, this past August, she decided she loves it. And we got it really fast into production so that it could come out next fall. But the truth is, the book is much better now. And if you have a really good editor, you are lucky. And a lot of very famous writers don't get edited. And I have said, if I ever get really famous, I'm still going to be edited. Because how many books, like Donna Tartt, what's the book? My mind just went to The Goldfinch. I love that book. It should have been 200 pages shorter. If she had had a better editor, the book would have been better. So if you find someone who you can work with and you have the same goal, it's a gift. It's a gift. I rewrote The Art Forger. I'd say every page is being rewritten at least 20 times. The Muralist, it's probably 30 or 40 times. And that's what it takes, It takes, it's rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. Personally, I hate writing the first draft. That's the part I don't like. I like the rewriting. That's the part I like. Yes?
With your original books, often we go back to things we did before and we go, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
Are they good, do you think?
Now there's a loaded question. Yes, I think they're good. I think that they're a different genre. So I think for the psychological suspense genre, they are good, and I think they're better than most books in that. But you hope you're going to get better. That's the hope. So I think they were robbed because they didn't get promoted correctly, and we'll see now that they're available what the response is and what happens.
But did you have to go back and re-edit them?
I didn't re-edit them. Some people do, but I didn't. I had another publisher just handle it and just do it. Once I started doing that, then it would be a year for each book, and I just wanted to keep moving forward. Yes?
How do forgers get the materials that they use to clearly the man on 60 Minutes used the wrong light and ended up, he used a modern light instead of an ancient. Where are they getting postage?
So the question is, where do the forgers get the material that they need? Because, for example, if you're forging a painting that was made in the case of the art forger in the late 19th century, you can't use in that painting any chemical that has been invented since then. You have to use a canvas that comes from that time, because carbon dating can do it. You have to use the screws and the nails and everything have to be old in order for all of this to work. So there are places that they can get these materials, and they have to be really careful. That was the thing with the 60 Minutes. He used a white that wasn't available then. Really, really interesting. I just read this. I wish I could have put it in the book. They found that nuclear material has a very, very long half-life. And so anything that was in existence after the nuclear bomb is a date. And they can tell from what's on things whether it came from before or after. So there are a bunch of different things that they have to work around. And it's fascinating, and they do it. They figure it out, you know? Well, it's like, I don't know.
You did a good job on that.
Oh, thank you. She's telling me I did a good job on that.
Well, when you were describing the material that she had to buy.
Yeah, it's really fun.
You went into great detail, and I thought that was a very interesting part of the book.
Remember when I said I didn't know anybody in the audience? She's really my aunt. One more, two more? Are we doing the questions? One more question. Okay, we got one more. Yes, ma'am.
This is, again, a technical question, and you described so aptly how Claire forges. And reading that, I kept being struck. She's in this apartment, doesn't seem really large, and she's using these amazingly caustic materials, and she's baking them. How is she not killing herself? That was, you know.
Well, you are absolutely right that if this were a nonfiction book, she would be dead. But fortunately, it's a novel.
So we don't try it at home.
Do not try this at home. No, do not try this at home. You're right. You're right. Well, thank you all very much. Thank you. Thanks for coming. And I'll be happy to sign books. So.
Just one more announcement from me. If you do want to go to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, we do have museum passes here at the library. So be sure to either check the website or check in the library and get passes now that you know about the missing paintings. And check out those empty frames.
And the empty frames where the paintings were. They're there. Yeah, it's a nice audience.